So we recently got some pretty big new information for Borderlands 4 that's more targeted at the end game, and more specifically, some of the difficulty we could be expecting in the end game. And this actually comes from some footage that I'll have linked in the description, where someone actually goes and scrolls over all of the different matchmaking options, which we've seen this window before, but we didn't get to see this specific information, and it actually shows us some of the difficulties we'll be getting into the end game. So in this matchmaking window, there are 4 different windows. There's campaign, ultimate vault hunter, Moxxi's big encore runs, and weekly wildcard. So this is all specifically for matchmaking, but it gave us a bunch of information on some of the stuff for just all of the game. So first off is campaign, find new players near your mission progress. Now what's also interesting is these different matchmaking do have some requirements for them, but for the campaign, it has a check mark because that person's on the campaign and it says campaign not completed, but presumably based upon this, you can't matchmake campaign after you've already done it. I'm wondering if that means there'll be a different matchmaking section that allows you to replay through campaign missions or something, but that's not really the interesting part. The most interesting part is under Ultimate Vault Hunter. And this says explore Kairos UVH, which is Ultimate Vault Hunter ranks enabled. And there's 2 requirements. You need the campaign completed and you need Ultimate Vault Hunter ranks unlocked. Now, what's interesting is this does have 2 different sections for those. You would think you would get Ultimate Vault Hunter after you complete the campaign, but it seems like you have to do something specific to get Ultimate Vault Hunter unlocked after completing the campaign, and you have to do both of those. And it says ranks, plural. So it seems there's going to be a bunch of different Ultimate Vault Hunter ranks to progress through, which would make sense. We've had similar things like this in a lot of previous Borderlands games, things like ARPGs that Borderlands is heavily inspired by. A lot of them have different difficulties, like you go to Diablo 4 right now, it goes up to Torment 4. So there's these different multiple ranks of difficulties that you keep progressing through to just get better and better loot, but the game becomes more difficult with each rank. And this is actually a pretty massive reveal for specifically the end game, because that's what this essentially is. Having all of these different Ultimate Vault Hunter levels or ranks to go through, progress through, get better loot, and have more difficult content. We do know that Borderlands 4 is going to have the biggest end game of any Borderlands game on launch. We do know that they want bosses and a lot of other content to be much more difficult than previous Borderlands games. They've specifically mentioned this more so on bosses. And we also know that this isn't going to be working how the difficulty system worked in Borderlands 3, because we already know that a lot of mini bosses, badasses, and more difficult enemies will have like an affix system like ARPGs have, where they can have these randomly rolled affixes that are essentially like augments to that enemy that give them some other ability or effect. Maybe when they run around, they leave poison behind them. Maybe they have shock effects that go off and chain lightning around. Maybe they have a line between them and some other point. Maybe they connect themselves to other enemies that if you go through the lines, it deals damage to you. So we know that's just part of the game in general. So we're not going to have the big issues with difficulty like we had on Borderlands 3, where everything just had the effect of the difficulty you were in. But then we have Moxxi's big encore runs, group up to run bosses for their powerful loot. This again is more of an endgame matchmaking. You have to have the campaign completed and Ultimate Vault Hunter ranks unlocked as well. So again, this seems to be specifically for the end game. At least when it comes to matchmaking, you will have access to the Encore machine just going through the campaign by yourself, even when leveling up. But it seems like some of these matchmaking specific ones do kind of require you to be in the end game. Then finally, we have weekly wildcard. Confident, test your build against these weekly missions. And again, you need campaign completed and Ultimate Vault Hunter ranks unlocked. So this is more endgame. I do really like this weekly wildcard. It seems like there are going to be a certain set of missions that are augmented in some way on a weekly basis. And I'm wondering if this is just going to like increase difficulty or have different augments or modifiers. And this may actually be the way to target farm different loot, because some of the developers have talked about having different pieces of content being kind of focused on target farming different loot outside of just the bosses having their dedicated drops. So maybe weekly wildcard is also a way to even more specifically target farm different things on a weekly basis that cycle in every week. So that could also be really cool. And I'm hoping these missions can get really crazy. Now that's the main new information we've received on the endgame and all the different difficulties. Now this gameplay was with an interview with Randy Pitchford, and he does talk about bosses and boss difficulty in that as well, and in some more recent interviews where they do want bosses to generally be more difficult. The bosses we've already seen, especially the vault boss, does also seem to have a lot more mechanics and a lot more interesting mechanics, and developers have specifically said that the vault boss we have seen so far is like the starter one. Like that's the lowest tier of boss you're going to be going against. So it seems like bosses are going to get really crazy. They're going to have a lot more mechanics. They're going to have a lot more actual things that you have to focus on during that fight to do the mechanics to actually be able to defeat the boss, which is something I'm a really big fan of. I hope the bosses are much more difficult. I hope they get crazy difficult with higher difficulty settings. I hope there's a lot more mechanics and just have these bosses much more interesting boss fights. So all in all, I think pretty much everything I've been hearing so far about the endgame and the different difficulty settings we're going to have access to just makes me more excited for the game. We're not going to have the really bad difficulty settings that we had in Borderlands 3. Sounds like they're going to be much better here, and the game's just going to be generally more endgame focused, have a much larger endgame, and it seems like they want the game to be more difficult to keep it being a lot more interesting, especially when you're into the farm stages of the endgame. So pretty much everything I've been hearing, I'm excited for. But that's all I wanted to go over, so thanks for watching.